Hi there, I'm Haruka. Before I got trapped inside the computer and became a VTuber, I wrote about soccer. Specifically, I wrote about Major League Soccer and the NWSL, but that's next month. Anyway, I mainly wrote about the Chicago Fire, but I still needed to pay attention to the rest of the league so I knew whether or not the Fire losing against this team was embarrassing. With the 2021 season set to start next week, I'm continuing my MLS Fun Times week with an actual serious preview on the coming season. Let's start. First, let's take a quick look at last season. Sports in general have been wonky for the past year or so, and I'm not just talking about the large break in the season and lack of fans. There's been a whole lot more underdogs winning things in the past few years. It was upset city in the NFL this past year, and the current Premier League season is all just messed up. So for MLS last year, there were two separate competitions, the MLS's back tournament and the actual regular season followed by the playoffs with the MLS Cup at the end. Orlando City was the only real home team in the MLS's back tournament, which was played at a sports complex in Disney World, and Orlando dominated that tournament. Honestly, I was frightened. And then the Portland Timbers won it in the end, and all was right in the world. When the league came back to the now very shortened season, more teams were allowed to be in the playoffs than usual. In fact, the rules were changed multiple times to try to make it as fair as possible. The Philadelphia Union dominated the league, getting over 2 points per game. For reference, in the standings, a win is considered 3 points. Most good teams have about a 1.3 points per game. They won the Supporters' Shield, or this season, they won a spray-painted Captain America shield. Very fitting. In the Western Conference, things got weird with the Colorado Rapids, Minnesota United, and Sporting Kansas City coming out and performing, with all three teams outperforming the usual suspects, LA Galaxy and actual powerhouse LAFC. The playoffs themselves were weird as well. After their amazing season, Philly was shut out in the first round by the New England Revolution, who ended up making it to the conference final. Also beating a higher seed and better team for no reason, Nashville SC. Strangely enough, despite the weird regular season, the Western Conference representatives in the MLS Cup final was still the Seattle Sounders. In the end, the actual winners were the Columbus Crew, who got really hot after coming back from the tournament and continued to use that right momentum at the right time and won the MLS Cup at home in an empty stadium 3-0. Now to give you a short message on each of the 27 MLS teams this season. This took way too long to make, but I did this for you. Atlanta United. Atlanta's had a rough go of it recently, only being handed the 2020 US Open Cup by default for having won the previous season. But seriously, Frank de Boer really did a number on the team's image, and this honestly amazing team has fallen apart. Plus, the really key injury of Josef Martinez had to hurt. This coming season, it doesn't look like there will be an immediate return to the top, but judging by roster alone, you should be in the playoff picture. You still got Josef Martinez, stop complaining. Austin FC. Austin FC was created when the owner of the Columbus Crew, Anthony Precourt, decided he just wanted to move the oldest team in the league to Austin. For no reason. Everyone hated it, there were widespread protests, and eventually a different ownership group was able to jump in and take over Columbus while Precourt continued along to Austin. So pretty much no one actually wants to see Austin except for Matthew McConaughey apparently. In terms of actual outlook, it's an expansion team. You've got your standard mix and match of MLS veterans. Usually this technique doesn't work, but Nashville proved us wrong last season. The key players are going to be Matt Beasler and Diego Fagundes trying to bring the team together. CF Montreal. The Montreal Impact decided to try for a really dumb rebrand that no one really wanted or likes. It's so bad that their coach, Thierry Henry, resigned. Actually, Henry just really missed his family, who he's been isolated from due to the whole 2020 thing, and he just wanted to go home. Completely understandable. But last season already wasn't a good look for Montreal, and losing one of their biggest selling points is not going to make them any better. Despite some moves, it looks like the roster just got worse this year. I'd call them favorites for the wooden spoon. Sorry. Chicago Fire. The Chicago Fire are a mystery wrapped in an enigma hidden somewhere in the Fate timeline. Last year's offseason was massive with the announcement of a move to Soldier Field, a very unpopular rebrand, a change in ownership and management, and a lot of player turnover. This offseason, they made like 3 signings, and that's it. On paper, this team should have made the playoffs, and MLS was literally changing the rules, almost trying to help them make the playoffs, and they still couldn't. With such little change, I genuinely don't know what will happen with this Chicago team, and I'm not even sure if this season will hold any meaning over next season. The answer is probably hidden somewhere in the saber route of Fate Hollow Ataraxia, along with the meaning of life. Colorado Rapids. The Colorado Rapids have never really been that good. Even the season they won the MLS Cup, it was generally considered an anomaly of a season for all of MLS. However, they have been working at trying to develop a better team, and last season we finally saw it deployed. They did pretty well, but it could also have been a bit of a small sample size since Colorado only played 18 games while the rest of the league played around 23 games. They should look the same, and if they play a full season, I think they'll do pretty much the same thing in the West next season. Columbus Crew. Columbus is the slow burn story of MLS. They're never the best, but every once in a while they just show up up and win. However, it looks like this year they're finally going to have that dominant season. Last season ended with an MLS Cup win after a great end to the regular season, and this offseason they added playmaker Kevin Molino and scoring king Bradley Wright Phillips. I still don't believe that Columbus is the sort of team to win a continental competition, but this is a team that has the ability to win another MLS Cup. DC United. Last year was rough. So rough that DC had to fire Ben Olsen, the legendary former captain who's been coaching DC for a decade. Apparently there's a belief that the only thing needed to change was the coach, since the roster isn't different. The only new thing is Hernan Losada. So unless he does something revolutionary, this season will still be pretty rough for DC. FC Cincinnati. FC Cincy's been a training dummy for the entire league since they showed up in their inaugural season. However, this past offseason saw a massive influx of new players with a lot of hype around them. Designated players Lucho Acosta, Brenner, and Jurgen Locaida will be pivotal in turning the ship around. And if they pan out, Cincy might just be contenders. FC Dallas. Dallas as a team should probably just be seen as a team that produces players rather than a team that actually competes in MLS. Just look at Weston McKennie. They had a decent season last year and even got a win in the playoffs over Portland on penalties. They're pretty boring. I don't see them doing better or doing worse. I think they'll be about the same this season. Houston Dynamo. Houston also had an unnecessary rebrand, but this one was received much better than everyone else's. In terms of actual chances, Houston was looking pretty good until they lost a bunch of good players at the end of the 2019 season. 2020 completely sucked for Houston. Darwin Quintero is clearly not the like-for-like replacement for Albert Ellis that they wanted him to be, and I think that without heavy changes, they will continue to struggle. Inter Miami. For those playing from home, this is the team that David Beckham owns, and I still don't know how to feel about them. Not just for the fact that Beckham's original contact with the Galaxy apparently stipulated him getting this franchise, but also the actual team itself is just so weird to me. There's a lot of really interesting and cool names on the team that inspire confidence, but actually seeing how this team lines up and watching them play is no confidence. They've got Blaise Matuidi, Gonzalo Higuain, and Rodolfo Pizarro, and I think Beckham just wants to continue the retirement league narrative in MLS, which sucks. And then he went and got his old friend Phil Neville to coach the team, and anyone who's followed women's soccer while Neville was coaching England will know that he's not going to help at all. LA Galaxy. The Galaxy have always relied on a big name signing, and this past season we saw exactly why. Their big signing Chicharito did not play, and when he did play he was so extremely ineffective. And this offseason they've lost their main playmaker Christian Pavon since they were unable to find a way to get him permanently, and coach Guillermo Barros-Schelotto was canned mid-season. Mass pandemonium in LA. I think that LA will once again try for a big name signing in the summer window, but if that doesn't work out, I think they will likely be out of the playoffs again. Los Angeles FC. Bob Bradley is the greatest American soccer coach of all time. He has led 3 separate MLS expansion teams to instant success. This guy knows what he's doing. The 2020 season was still rough on everyone, so LAFC's play in the actual league was kind of messy, but in the CONCACAF Champions League, they were so close to becoming the first MLS team to win it. In terms of this season, there are 3 names: Diego Rossi, Brian Rodriguez, and Carlos Vela. As long as they keep playing, LAFC is not getting stopped. Minnesota United. The Loons started off in MLS incredibly slow, but after a few years of intense building, they look pretty damn good. They lost some pieces, added some pieces, and honestly they aren't better or worse than they were last year. I'd say that they're just going to be pretty solid in 2021, maybe even putting up a challenge for the top of the West. Nashville SC. Nashville started their expansion season with the strategy of having MLS vets lead the way. You got Jalil Anibaba, Dax McCarty, David Akam, Dominique Badji. All these guys know how to play in this league. And usually that doesn't work that well, but somehow they did come up with an impressive performance last season, making it pretty deep into the playoffs. On the other hand, I'm still not certain that this team is for real. The only DP on their team worth writing home about is Hani Mukhtar, and their reinforcements for this coming season was another crop of MLS vets, including CJ Sapong. I just don't think that they'll do anything this year, but they proved me wrong last year, so who knows. New England Revolution. You know what I said earlier about Bob Bradley being the greatest American soccer coach? Bruce Arenas is the only challenger to that title. The man is a wizard. The moment he was hired by the Revs, they instantly turned it around. Normally, DPs are these flashy, big-name players, but not in New England. You wouldn't think of the names Gustavo Bo, Adam Buxa, or Carlos Gil as recognizable players, but they have performed incredibly for the Revs. With a quintessential MLS coach and a quintessential MLS lineup, I think that New England might very well be able to match their run last season and be back in the Eastern Conference Final. New York City FC. NYCFC is owned by the New York Yankees and Manchester City. This is the highest concentration of evil I have ever seen in sports. Anyway, they had a rough start to 2020, but after the tournament, they just came out of their corner swinging. I don't think much was expected of them prior to the season, so with key exits from Ronald Matrita and Alex Ring, I think we'll see a correction downwards in 2021. New York Red Bulls. NYRB fired head coach Chris Armas last year despite not fully being terrible. They just felt like they were performing below their potential. But looking at this team, I think that he pretty much got them to where they belong. It's not an impressive team, and they're continuing to shed players like Kaku, Alex Mule, Ben Menes, and Mark Rasikovsky. The Red Bulls may not get worse, but they for sure aren't getting any better. Orlando City. Orlando have dug their way out of the pits of hell and really shocked the league this past year. They tore through the tournament and led an amazing charge to the regular season and only lost in the playoffs to that weird Revs team. When you look at this roster, it's not hard to find the quality. Nani has refused to show his age, Daryl DK has the potential to be better than possibly Kyle Laren was, and Chris Mueller has been amazing for this squad. At the same time, they also made a really weird and dumb decision by signing a washed-up Alexandre Pato. So, it's not going to hurt Orlando, but I certainly question their motives. Philadelphia Union. Philly has been building this team over the course of almost a decade now. It has been 7 years since Jim Curtin took over and has led this amazing transformation into a powerhouse. Taking an academy-first approach, they built an amazing team on the cheap and are profiting from that both in silverware and transfer fees. The only problem is that those transfer fees mean that these great youth prospects are now leaving. Mark McKenzie and Brendan Aronson are going to be greatly missed, and while there's still plenty of firepower left, I'm not sure if they'll have the same oomph as the past few seasons. Of course, this will be temporary with more prospects on the way. Portland Timbers. Many of Portland's key players are getting pretty up there in age. Guys like Diego Valeri, Sebastian Blanco, and the Chara Bros might not last for long. On the other hand, they're still playing and Valeri hasn't lost a step yet. Plus, it's not like they have no youth. Jeremy Obobise is really growing into his role on the team, and I think that for this season, Portland will continue to be the team that they've always been. Real Salt Lake. From the outside, it looks like RSL is trying to make the same big changes that Philly's made, but they're doing it with a whole lot less success than Philly's gotten. Last season was a complete failure, especially when many thought they'd made enough improvements going into 2020 to step things up. Look, I like Albert Rusnak, I like Justin Glad, and they have room for another DP in the summer transfer window. It's just that I don't think that this team has much going for them at the moment. San Jose Earthquakes. I don't know who the Quakes are supposed to be, and at this point, I'm not sure if they know either. Matias Almeida is a genius, but he also made some really weird decisions with the team's defensive strategy, leading to some horrifying losses in September, like this 5-1 loss to LAFC, a 7-1 loss to Seattle, a 6-1 loss to Portland, and a 5-0 loss to Colorado. But San Jose is still a dangerous team. While they lost Vaco and Nick Lima over the offseason, I'd contend that they aren't as important to this team as they look. I think that things hinge more around Jackson Ewell. After a year of getting familiarized with Almeida's system, I think that the Quakes are going to be better. Seattle Sounders. Is comparing a soccer team to a cockroach an insult or a compliment? Asking for a friend. Look, no matter how bad the Sounders get in the first half of the season, they always get hot in the second half and charge into the playoffs. They lost fullback Jovan Jones and center back Roman Torres this past offseason, but as long as they've got Nick Lodero, Raul Ruidiaz, and real-life Lego man Jordan Morris, they'll do fine. Seriously though, Jordan Morris is like Steve from Minecraft. Sporting Kansas City. Sporks has been destroyed by injuries the past few years, so despite having really good squads, they haven't really been able to show it off. This past year they kind of were able to do it, but last year was weird. And traditionally, it's been about the defense for Kansas City, especially with this iteration of the team that's been bombed with injuries. But this year, they're much more impressive on the attacking end of the pitch than the defensive end. The Sporks defense has lost two key players in Iko Parra and Matt Beasler over the past few years. Really, what we're going to need to pay attention to is the relationship between Gianluca Busio, Daniel Saloy, Alan Pulido, and Johnny Russell, because they're all starting level players and Peter Vermees is going to have to fit all of them into the attack. Toronto FC. Toronto isn't quite their old selves yet, but they're definitely getting back up after a disaster in 2019. Alejandro Pozuelo has filled the Giovinco-sized hole in that attack, and Richie Larea might be as impressive as his fullback counterpart on the Canadian national team, Alphonso Davies. I'm also interested in seeing how Ayo Akinola performs this season after he led the team in scoring in 2020. It doesn't look like there were any major additions to the team, and while they lost Laurent Simon to retirement, I think that as long as Pozuelo holds out, they should have another impressive campaign. Vancouver Whitecaps. Full disclosure, I never think about the Vancouver Whitecaps. Ever. They just feel wholly unremarkable as a team. They make the playoffs sometimes, they don't make the playoffs other times, they just sort of exist. How did the best fullback in the world come from this team? Anyway, the only real notable thing about the team last season is that they somehow didn't record a single draw in the regular season, and during the MLS Back tournament, they somehow made it out of the group stage in the middle of a massive goalkeeper crisis. They beat the Chicago Fire 2-0 while playing with what I think was their 4th choice goalkeeper. This doesn't matter too much, just a weird thing that happened. This past offseason, they made a couple of interesting signings that I think the season is going to depend on. Forward Daber Caicedo and defender Bruno Gaspar. So, overall predictions. For Golden Boot, I think that Josef Martinez will reclaim this. It doesn't matter how good or bad his team is, all this man does is score. I think a guy with a good shot at MVP is Kevin Molino, who just joined the Columbus Crew. He looked great with Minnesota, and he's going to be in an even better position to perform in 2021. Coach of the Year will go to Jaap Stam of FC Cincinnati, who will stop being the laughingstock of the league, if his big signings work out. Top of the Eastern Conference will be the Columbus Crew. As I said, I think they've just gotten even better after winning the MLS Cup. And top of the Western Conference will be LAFC, and LAFC will also be taking the Supporters' Shield. They're just too strong. My MLS Cup prediction is Minnesota United. I think that they've been knocking on the door for a while, and while they lost a key guy in Kevin Molino, they've still got a lot of quality on the squad. And that's it. That's all I've got for my 2021 MLS preview. I did a lot of general research for this video. I mentioned earlier that I'm more familiar with the Chicago Fire than most of the other teams, so I might be pointing out players that have injuries, or there may be storylines that I haven't noticed that change the way certain results are framed. If I did miss something, be nice when you correct me in the comments. This took a lot of work and things had to have slipped between the cracks. If you want to know what MLS team you should follow, maybe check out this fun video I made back on Tuesday. Otherwise, please like and subscribe, and we'll be back to our regularly scheduled Weeb content next week.